Titan, a massive Rottweiler, was no ordinary stray. His sleek black fur gleamed under the dim city lights, but it was the scars across his body that told the true story of his survival. Titan had never known the comforts of a regular life. Born into a family that once cared for him, he had been abandoned when they could no longer provide for him. The streets of Chicago became his home, and the harsh, unforgiving environment forced him to grow stronger, faster, and more aware of the dangers lurking around every corner. Titan's massive frame moved through the city with purpose, but there was a weariness to his movements. His once shiny coat had become ragged over time, and his body bore the marks of his struggles, cuts, bruises, and scars from encounters with other animals, humans, and the very streets that had become both his prison and his protector. His ribs were visible, his stomach often growling with hunger as he scavenged the alleys for food. Every corner, every darkened street, held a reminder of his struggle to survive in a world that seemed indifferent to his existence. Yet, for all the hardships Titan had faced, he had retained a certain grace. Despite his tough exterior, his heart remained kind and loyal. He had learned the art of survival not just through instinct but through years of quiet resilience. Titan had long ago accepted his place in the world, wandering the streets, staying hidden in the shadows, avoiding people who didn't care, and watching out for those who might. But tonight, something felt different. The storm that had begun in the early evening was intensifying. The wind howled, rattling windows and shaking loose debris from the buildings. The rain came down in torrents, making the streets look like rivers, while thunder crashed overhead in a rhythmic roar that seemed to mirror the frustration Titan had felt for so long. The city, which usually felt full of life, was now drowned in the fury of the storm, with only the occasional passing car headlights illuminating the streets for fleeting moments. Titan moved carefully through the downpour, his paws barely making a sound on the slick, wet pavement. His stomach ached with hunger, but he'd learned to be patient. The streets had taught him that food wasn't always guaranteed, and sometimes he had to wait. He had learned to find food where others might overlook it. Old dumpsters, food wrappers, the occasional discarded snack, anything that could fill the aching void in his belly, even for a short time. But tonight, as the storm grew fiercer, something in the air was different. Titan felt a strange pull, a shift in the atmosphere. The usual sounds of the city were muffled by the storm, but amidst the cacophony of rain and wind, there was a faint sound that cut through the noise. A cry. It was weak, fragile, almost drowned out by the storm, but it was there. And it was human. Titan's ears perked up, his body immediately going on alert. The instinct to protect, the instinct that had kept him alive all these years, surged within him. This was not the usual cry of animals or the sounds of other strays. This was something different, something that reached deep into Titan's heart and pulled him toward it. His eyes narrowed, scanning the street for the source of the sound. His nose twitched as he inhaled the stormy air, following the faint scent of desperation that seemed to hang in the air. Titan stood motionless for a moment, the rain pouring relentlessly around him, his massive body half drenched. He listened intently, ears straining against the storm's fury. The baby's cries had grown weaker, each sound softer and more desperate, but still there, faintly echoing through the night. It was as if the storm itself wanted to drown her out, to swallow her cries whole, but Titan wouldn't allow it. His heart ached with an intensity he had never felt before, and it took everything in him to ignore the gnawing instinct to run for shelter himself. There was something about this moment, something that told him he could not walk away. Titan had survived countless battles on the unforgiving streets of Chicago, learned to avoid danger, to fight when necessary, and to endure the cold, the hunger, and the loneliness. But never before had he encountered something like this. The storm raged above him, but the fear he felt for the helpless child out in the rain surpassed everything. This wasn't a fight he could win with his strength alone. It wasn't even a battle he could fight. This was a rescue, pure and simple. He could not, would not, leave her behind. His sharp black eyes scanned the dark alley as he moved closer to the source of the cry. The baby's tiny form was barely visible beneath a pile of discarded bags and litter, left to fend for herself in the heart of the storm. Titan could hear her struggle to breathe, her chest rising and falling with the effort. The sound of her faint cries only deepened Titan's resolve. She was so small, so fragile. No one could hear her. No one but him. He had to act fast. With a soft whimper that rumbled deep in his chest, Titan approached the small bundle carefully, his large body moving with an uncommon tenderness. The little baby, wrapped in a thin, damp blanket, lay in the mess, shivering violently. Her tiny hands were outstretched as if reaching for something, someone, anything to make the pain go away. Titan lowered his head to the blanket, carefully nudging it aside with his strong muzzle. For the briefest moment, his heart sank. Her face was pale, the color draining from her skin as she cried in distress. The rain continued to fall, soaking everything, but it didn't matter. Titan knew he couldn't wait any longer. The baby's cries became weaker, each one breaking Titan's heart a little more. Without hesitation, he carefully grasped the edge of the blanket with his teeth, gently lifting the baby in his mouth. Her tiny body was light as a feather, barely any weight to her at all, and Titan's protective instinct surged. He moved slowly at first, mindful not to hurt her, his powerful jaws making sure she was cradled safely within them. His breath was shallow, the urgency of the situation pressing on him. But his movements were deliberate and cautious. He couldn't risk making a mistake now. The storm didn't let up. The wind howled like a pack of wolves in the distance, and the rain turned into sheets of water that seemed to pour from the sky endlessly. Titan's coat was already drenched, but he ignored the cold and the discomfort. His focus was on the little one he was carrying. Every step he took seemed heavier, but he pressed on, determined to get her somewhere safe, somewhere warm. The memory of her tiny, trembling hands reaching for him flashed in his mind, and his pace quickened. As Titan neared the street corner, his keen eyes caught sight of something familiar. A house in the distance. The windows were lit from within, casting a warm glow into the dark, rain-soaked night. Titan had passed this house many times before, always noticing how the light never seemed to flicker, how it remained constant even through the darkest hours. The smell of freshly baked bread often hung in the air near this house, a welcoming aroma that, despite his solitary life, made Titan feel a fleeting sense of peace. He had never approached the house before, but tonight, it felt like the only place to go. Titan's steps were more determined now, his mind set on reaching the door, on finding help for the helpless baby in his care. The rain was unforgiving, stinging his skin, but the warmth from the house, from the light shining out of the windows, called to him like a beacon. He moved toward it with urgency, each stride becoming faster but still careful. The baby's slight weight in his mouth made every step a delicate one, as though the life of this child depended on the smallest misstep. He reached the porch with a deep sigh of relief. Titan had made it. The house loomed ahead, its warm light now only a few steps away, and Titan felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. The baby's quiet breaths in his mouth reminded him of her fragility, and despite the urgency that had driven him, he had to stop. Just for a moment. He set the baby down gently at the base of the porch, his eyes never leaving her. The storm still raged around him, but there, on the threshold of safety, Titan waited. For a brief moment, the world around him seemed to fade. The rain no longer mattered. The wind no longer howled. All that was left was the small baby, shivering in the cold, with Titan standing guard over her. His heart hammered in his chest, his mind racing as he waited for someone to come out of that warm house and help. He had done his part. He had carried her to safety. Now, it was up to the humans to take over. The door opened. Titan's sharp eyes darted to the entrance, his body instinctively going tense. There, standing in the doorway, was a woman. Her eyes widened as she looked down at the baby, her face a mixture of disbelief and concern. She hesitated, her eyes flicking from the baby to Titan and back again. Titan's heart skipped a beat as he watched her. She was the one. She was the one who would take over from him, who would care for the little girl he had rescued. For a long moment there was silence, just the sound of the rain and the soft whimper of the baby. Titan stood, unmoving, his gaze fixed on the woman. Then slowly, she stepped forward, crouching down to scoop the baby into her arms. Titan watched as she cradled the child, her face softening with something Titan couldn't quite understand, but felt deeply in his own chest. The baby was in safe hands now, and Titan could rest. The woman looked up at Titan, her eyes filled with gratitude and awe. Titan's eyes met hers, and in that brief exchange, there was an understanding, an unspoken bond. He had done his job. He had saved her. The baby was safe. And now, Titan could finally walk away. Without a second glance, Titan turned and padded into the night, knowing that the baby would be okay. He had completed his mission, and as he disappeared into the shadows of the city, the storm began to die down, the night slowly returning to a fragile calm. Emma sat in the dim light of her living room, the soft hum of the city outside barely reaching her ears. Her apartment in Chicago was small, simple, and yet it felt far too large for the emptiness she had carried with her for so long. At 35 years old, Emma had once been full of life and joy, with a family that filled her days with laughter and warmth. But that was before the accident, before everything changed. Now, every day felt like a repeat of the last, a blur of hours spent staring out the window, lost in memories of what once was. The accident had stolen so much from her, her husband, David, and their young son, Oliver. The crash had happened so fast, leaving Emma unable to react, unable to stop the wave of devastation that swept over her in the blink of an eye. The grief that followed was suffocating, an ever-present weight on her chest that no amount of time could seem to ease. She tried to keep moving, to force herself out of bed each morning, but most days it felt like a futile effort. Her apartment had become her refuge, her prison, and the memories of happier times haunted her, replaying in her mind like a broken record. Sitting on the couch, her eyes unfocused, Emma allowed her thoughts to drift. She could still hear David's laugh, still feel the warmth of his hand on hers. And Oliver. His small hands wrapped around her finger, his bright eyes full of wonder at the world. It had all been taken from her, leaving her alone in a world that felt colder than it ever had before. Her eyes fell on a photograph of her family, a moment frozen in time, and she found herself tracing the edges of it with her fingers as if she could somehow bring them back by touching the image. Her gaze shifted to the window, where the storm outside raged on. The rain lashed against the glass, and the wind howled, making the buildings creak and groan under the pressure. Emma felt the weight of the night settle over her, the same heaviness that had lingered in her soul since the accident. She had stopped trying to escape her grief. There was no point in pretending things could ever be normal again. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. It was so soft at first that Emma thought she might have imagined it. But then it came again, louder this time. A persistent tapping that interrupted the silence of the room. She sat up, blinking in confusion. Who could be visiting at this hour, in the middle of the storm? Her heart began to race as she stood up, her feet heavy as she made her way to the door. The idea of seeing anyone, of engaging with the world outside her apartment, made her uncomfortable. but something about the knock stirred a curiosity she hadn't felt in months. Maybe it was just a neighbor seeking shelter from the storm. She opened the door, and for a moment, her mind couldn't process what she was seeing. There, standing in the doorway, was Titan. His massive, muscular frame was soaked through, his fur slicked down with rain. His dark eyes, usually so guarded, were bright with an intensity that made her take a step back in surprise. But it wasn't Titan that stopped her breath, no. It was what he was holding in his mouth. A tiny bundle, wrapped in a soggy blanket, barely visible except for a small, pale face peering out. The baby. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She felt her knees weaken, her hands shaking as she reached for the doorframe to steady herself. The shock was almost too much to bear. Titan had brought a baby to her doorstep. She had no idea how he had found her or why he had come, but there was no mistaking the desperate look in his eyes. He had done his part. Now it was up to her. The tiny baby, so fragile and small, her skin nearly blue from the cold, was wrapped in the soaked blanket, crying weakly in Titan's mouth. The sound of the baby's distress pulled at Emma's heart, and in that instant, all the grief, the loneliness, and the despair seemed to wash away, replaced by something else entirely. She had no idea what to do. She hadn't cared for anyone in so long, not since the accident. But something in her stirred. Something powerful deep inside told her that this was her chance to do something good, something right. Without thinking, she dropped to her knees, her joints protesting from the effort. She reached out, gently pulling the baby from Titan's mouth. The weight of the child in her arms felt so light, as if she could break her with just one wrong move. Titan stood by her side, watching silently, his presence like a silent guardian. His large, wet body shivered from the cold, but he made no move to leave. Instead, he sat by the door, as though waiting for Emma to make her decision. Emma cradled the baby close, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to assess the situation. The baby's tiny body trembled in her arms, and her weak cries broke through the silence of the storm. Emma gently stroked the child's face, trying to offer some comfort, even though she didn't know how. Her eyes darted to Titan, who stood there unwavering, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. The dog had found the baby and brought her here, to Emma. The weight of it all settled in, and Emma felt a rush of emotions flood her system. This wasn't just a random encounter. It couldn't be. There was something about this moment that was both surreal and incredibly real. She had a chance to care for someone again, to protect someone, just as she had once protected Oliver. "Thank you," Emma whispered to Titan, her voice breaking slightly as she looked up at him. The words felt small, insignificant compared to what he had done, but she needed to say them, to acknowledge the incredible thing he had done. Titan's eyes met hers, and for the briefest of moments, Emma thought she saw a flicker of understanding. He had done his part. Now it was hers. Emma stood up carefully, the baby still wrapped in her arms. She stepped inside, Titan following her in, his wet paws leaving trails across the floor. She didn't care. All that mattered now was the baby in her arms. The baby who had been abandoned in the storm, left to die alone. Emma wouldn't let that happen. She couldn't. Not again. The warmth of her apartment wrapped around them, and for the first time in a long time, Emma felt something stir inside her. Something like hope. She wasn't sure what to do next, or how to care for this tiny, fragile life. But she knew one thing for sure. This child would not be left in the cold, abandoned like she had been before. She would give this baby a chance to survive, to live. And in return, maybe, just maybe, Emma could start to heal. In the days that followed, Emma found herself waking up to a new reality. The tiny life she now cradled in her arms had transformed the once quiet, sorrow-filled apartment into a place of warmth and purpose. It wasn't easy at first. The uncertainty was overwhelming, the thought of caring for this fragile, innocent child both thrilling and terrifying. She had never thought she would find herself in a position like this again. She had never thought she would have the chance to love and protect another life, not after the loss of her son, Oliver. But there she was, holding a baby. This little stranger who had been abandoned, left to fend for herself in the storm. And somehow, the simple act of caring for her began to shift something deep inside Emma. It was like a switch had been flipped, a flicker of light breaking through the darkness that had shrouded her for so long. For the first time in months, Emma felt something stir in her soul, something akin to hope. She didn't know much about babies. She had never been around them before Oliver, and even then it had been so long ago. But in that moment, the instinct to care for this little one, to nurture and protect her, was all-consuming. Emma gently placed the baby in the crib, wrapping her in a soft, warm blanket she had found tucked away in her closet. She warmed up a bottle of milk, something she had learned quickly from her brief research, and watched as the baby suckled it eagerly, her small hands curling around the bottle. The sound of the baby drinking was soothing to Emma, a comfort she hadn't known she needed. As the baby drifted off to sleep, Emma sat by her side, her hands trembling as she stroked the little one's soft cheek. The warmth of the room, the hum of the baby's steady breathing, felt like a lullaby that gently rocked Emma's heart. For the first time in so long, Emma didn't feel completely alone. She had a purpose again. She had a reason to get up each morning, something that needed her, something she could care for. It was small, but it was a start. Night after night, Emma's routine became increasingly familiar. The crying in the middle of the night, the soft cooing, the changing of diapers, the feeding, the rocking, the rhythm of it all was becoming a part of her. She woke up each time the baby cried, her body moving almost instinctively to comfort her. At first, Emma had struggled with the sleepless nights, her body exhausted from the constant care. But soon, she became attuned to the baby's needs, learning to read her tiny cries, to understand when she was hungry, when she needed to be held, when she was simply frightened. Each day brought something new, a discovery, a small victory in the journey of motherhood. But alongside the joy, there was a constant undercurrent of worry. Was she doing it right? Was she capable of giving this child everything she needed? Emma still felt like an imposter at times, like someone who wasn't truly ready for this role, someone who had no business being a mother. She would wake up in the middle of the night, her heart racing with fear as she listened to the baby's cries. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she couldn't be the mother this child deserved? These questions haunted her as she looked at the tiny face in her arms. Despite these fears, there was one thing Emma was certain of. She loved this child. That love grew with every passing day, a bond that deepened as the days turned into weeks. She felt it in the way her heart swelled every time the baby reached for her, in the way she would smile even through the exhaustion when the baby would fall asleep in her arms. The connection she felt was undeniable, as if this little one had come into her life at exactly the right moment, when she needed to heal and love again. And throughout it all, Titan was there. Emma had not expected the dog to stay, but Titan remained by her side, a silent yet powerful presence. He would lay by the crib, his large body resting on the floor, his eyes trained on the baby. Titan didn't bark or make a sound, but there was something in the way he watched over the child that brought Emma a sense of calm. It was as if he understood that this was his mission too, to protect this tiny life. Each night, after Emma fed the baby, Titan would settle beside her, offering a silent, watchful gaze that made Emma feel like she wasn't alone. Even though she wasn't sure what had brought Titan to her doorstep that night, she knew one thing for certain. He was meant to be there. Titan's presence became a comfort to Emma, a constant reminder that she wasn't facing this journey alone. He had saved the baby from the storm, and now he was helping Emma save herself. In many ways, Titan was a reflection of Emma's own healing process. Both of them had suffered loss. Both had known pain and abandonment. Yet here they were, finding solace in one another's company. Titan, once a stray with no place to call home, had found his purpose in protecting the baby. And Emma, once a woman who had lost everything, was finding a new sense of purpose in caring for this little one. The bond between Emma and the baby grew stronger with each passing day. Emma was no longer just surviving. She was thriving in her own way. Her heart, once closed off and weighed down by grief, was beginning to open again. She had learned to love, to care, to protect, and in turn, the baby was teaching Emma to love herself once more. The small victories, the quiet moments of joy, the laughter that she hadn't heard in years, they were all slowly rebuilding Emma's broken spirit. As she sat in the quiet of the night, holding the baby in her arms, Emma realized that she had found something precious in this unexpected chapter of her life. She was a mother once again, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was doing something right. Titan lay at her feet, his tail thumping softly against the floor, as if in agreement. Together, they had created a family, one that was built on trust, love, and the desire to protect the ones they cared for. Emma didn't have all the answers. She still had her doubts, her fears, and her scars. But she had learned something valuable. Love could heal, love could give her strength, and love could lead her through even the darkest times. And with the baby in her arms and Titan by her side, Emma knew she was ready to face whatever the future held. The news had spread quickly. A stray dog had saved a baby abandoned in the rain. The story of Titan's heroic act had captured the attention of the local media, and soon, Claire, the baby's biological mother, was glued to her television screen. At first, she couldn't believe it. Her mind raced as she watched the footage of the dog and the baby, the child she had left behind in a moment of despair. The images filled her with a deep, sinking guilt. The baby had survived, but what kind of mother was she? Claire had been struggling with depression after giving birth to her daughter, unable to cope with the overwhelming emotions and responsibilities. In her darkest moments, the weight of motherhood had crushed her, and she made the heart-wrenching decision to leave her newborn in the hopes that someone, anyone, would be able to care for her better than she could. It was a decision that haunted her every day, but seeing the baby's rescue had forced Claire to confront the reality of what she had done. As the days passed, the guilt gnawed at her, and Claire knew she couldn't continue hiding from the truth. The story of Titan's bravery gave her a glimmer of hope, but it also stirred a wave of fear. Would the baby still be there? Would Emma, the woman who had taken her in, be willing to give her back? Claire had no idea what to expect, but she knew she had to try. She had to make things right no matter how much it terrified her. One cold morning, Claire stood outside Emma's door, her hands trembling with anxiety. She had come, hoping to reclaim her daughter, but at the same time she was terrified of rejection. What if Emma had already bonded with the child? What if the bond they had formed was too strong for Claire to break? She had no idea what she was walking into, but she had no choice but to knock. When Emma opened the door, the shock on her face was immediate. She hadn't expected to see the baby's biological mother, and the mix of emotions that flooded through her was overwhelming. Claire stood there, her eyes filled with uncertainty and fear, but also determination. She had come to reclaim her daughter. But would Emma let her? Would Emma be willing to return the baby to her? Emma's heart raced as she stared at Claire. She had grown so close to the child, loved her as if she were her own. The baby had filled a space in her heart that she thought was permanently empty. But now, standing before her, was the woman who had given the baby life. the woman who had abandoned her. Emma felt conflicted, protective of the baby she had raised and cared for, but also understanding the pain and regret Claire must have been experiencing. This wasn't an easy situation. There was so much at stake. Titan, standing silently beside Emma, seemed to sense the tension in the air. The dog's eyes flickered between Emma and Claire, his posture stiff, as if assessing the situation. He had been with Emma through everything, watching over the baby and her caretaker, and now he was wary of Claire's presence. His protective instincts were on high alert, his sharp gaze never leaving Claire as she stepped closer. Titan didn't trust her yet, and Emma could feel the dog's unease as she stepped back into the apartment, leaving Claire to follow. "I know I've made a terrible mistake," Claire said, her voice shaky, her eyes filled with tears. I couldn't handle it. I thought I was doing the right thing by leaving her, but I was wrong. I didn't know what else to do, and I'm so sorry." Her words were broken, but they were filled with a raw, vulnerable honesty that made Emma's heart ache. Emma stepped back, her hand tightening around the door frame. The baby, now sleeping in the crib, was still the center of Emma's world. How could she possibly hand her over? Could she really trust Claire to take care of the child she had been nurturing for so long? The questions swirled in her mind, and every instinct told her to protect the baby at all costs. Claire's plea rang in her ears. She knew she was in a delicate position. Emma had been the one to care for the baby, the one who had given her warmth and security. But Claire was still the baby's mother. Emma knew this. She wasn't blind to the fact that the child had a mother, someone who had brought her into this world. The truth was complicated and painful, and as Emma looked at Claire's tear-streaked face, she was forced to confront her own feelings. "What if I'm not ready?" Claire's voice cracked, filled with uncertainty. "What if I can't do this? What if I fail her again?" The weight of Claire's words hit Emma like a wave. She understood the fear. She had felt it herself, every time she had doubted her own ability to be the mother the baby deserved. Emma had her own fears about being a good mother, about whether she was enough. But the difference between her and Claire was that she had made the decision to stay, to care for this child. Claire had left, and now Emma was being asked to relinquish the child she had come to love. Titan stood by the door, watching the interaction closely. He had never trusted easily, and though he had been with Emma through thick and thin, he couldn't help but feel the need to protect the baby. His eyes narrowed slightly as Claire spoke, as though he were weighing her words, measuring the sincerity of her emotions. The dog's protective instincts flared, and Emma could feel his tension. Titan wasn't sure of Claire yet, and neither was Emma. The future of the baby hung in the balance, and both women were standing at a crossroads. Emma could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her. To protect the child, she would have to make the hardest choice of her life. She had grown so attached to the baby, and the thought of letting go felt like losing a piece of herself. But Claire was her mother, and deep down, Emma knew that the right thing to do was to help Claire reclaim her daughter, even if it meant risking her own heart. Finally, Emma took a deep breath and turned to Claire. "I'll help you," she said softly. "But you have to prove to me that you're ready. You have to show me that you can be the mother she deserves." Titan's eyes softened as he stood by Emma's side. He had been with her through the journey, and in that moment he seemed to understand that this was the right decision. Despite his wariness of Claire, Titan knew that Emma would protect the baby no matter what. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Emma had made her choice. The air was thick with emotion as Emma and Claire sat in the dimly lit living room, their conversation quiet but profound. The tension that had defined their earlier encounter had dissipated, replaced with something more vulnerable, an understanding between two women, both scarred by their pasts, both seeking redemption in different ways. Emma could see it now. the sincerity in Claire's eyes, the regret that clung to every word she spoke. For the first time, Emma truly believed that Claire wanted to make things right, that she wanted to be the mother her child deserved. Claire spoke of her struggles, how, after the birth of her daughter, the overwhelming weight of motherhood had crushed her. The depression, the hopelessness, and the fear that she would fail had driven her to make a decision she would regret for the rest of her life. She had abandoned her baby, convinced that someone else could provide a better life for her. The raw honesty in Claire's voice made Emma's heart ache, and for the first time, Emma didn't see the woman who had left the baby in the rain. She saw a mother, broken by her own struggles, trying to find her way back. As they talked, the bond between them began to shift. Emma realized that Claire wasn't the enemy. She wasn't the villain in this story. She was a mother who had lost her way but was now determined to find it again. Emma understood the pain, the guilt, because in many ways she had walked that path too. She had been scared, unsure, and lost before. And while Emma had chosen to stay, Claire had made a choice born of desperation and fear. It was a mistake, a painful one, but it didn't have to define her forever. Titan, who had been lying quietly at Emma's feet, seemed to sense the change in the atmosphere. The tension in the room had shifted, and the dog's watchful eyes softened as he looked from Claire to Emma. Titan, who had been Emma's protector through it all, now seemed to accept that the time had come for the baby to return to her mother. He didn't growl or bark. He simply lay there, his large body relaxed, his gaze unwavering. Emma knew that Titan trusted her to make the right decision, and with that trust in mind, she found her resolve. After what felt like hours of conversation, Emma finally spoke, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I think you can be a good mother," she said, her words carrying the weight of everything she had come to understand. "I can see it in your eyes. I can see how much you love her, how much you regret what you did. But you need time. You need support, and I'll be here to help you through it." Claire's face crumpled as she held back tears, her breath catching in her throat. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I promise I won't let you down. I promise I'll be there for her. For you, too." Emma nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. She had come to a difficult decision, one that was both painful and necessary. The baby belonged with her biological mother. Claire had made mistakes, but she had the chance to make things right. Emma couldn't keep the baby to herself, no matter how much she had come to love her. But she could be there for Claire, help guide her, and offer the support she needed to be the mother she had always wanted to be. The next few days were filled with bittersweet emotions as Emma watched Claire bond with her daughter. The baby, who had been a stranger just days before, now looked to Claire for comfort, for warmth, for love. And with each passing moment, Emma's heart swelled with pride for Claire and for herself. She had given Claire the chance to heal, to make amends, and now she was standing by her as she took her first steps toward becoming a mother. As the baby slept peacefully in her mother's arms, Emma sat beside the crib, her hand gently resting on the edge of the wooden frame. Titan lay beside her, his large form stretched out comfortably on the floor. His eyes were half closed, and Emma could sense the understanding in his gaze. It was as if he knew the weight of this moment, the significance of the decision that had been made. Emma looked down at Titan, her heart full of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You changed my life. You saved us." Titan's tail wagged softly, the sound of it gently thumping against the floor as if acknowledging her words. Emma smiled through her tears, feeling the bond between them, stronger than ever. Titan had not only saved the baby that night, but he had also saved her. He had shown her the power of love, loyalty, and trust, things that she had lost but had found again, through the dog who had walked beside her all along. The room was quiet, except for the soft rustling of the baby's blanket as she shifted in her sleep. Emma sat beside the crib, her heart at peace, knowing her journey had come full circle. The pain of her past would never fully disappear, but with Titan by her side and the baby safely in Claire's arms, Emma felt that life had given her a second chance. She had the opportunity to make things right, to help someone else heal, and in turn, heal herself. As the night deepened, Emma stayed by the crib, watching over the baby, Claire, and Titan. It was a quiet moment of peace, a moment of joy. Emma had made the right choice by giving her heart to this little one. Now she would continue to guide Claire, helping her become the mother she had always wanted to be. In the soft glow of the nightlight, Emma knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with love and family. It was a reminder that life was unpredictable, but love had the power to change everything. At its core, the story is about redemption, love, and second chances. Emma, who had suffered grief and loss, opened her heart not only to the baby, but to Claire, the child's biological mother. Despite Claire's past struggles, Emma recognized her desire to change and gave her the chance. Titan, the loyal Rottweiler, symbolized unconditional love and protection. His devotion demonstrated that love transcends all boundaries, offering hope even in the darkest times. The story shows that healing comes from the willingness to try again and accept imperfections in ourselves and others. Share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another amazing story. Together, we can shine a light on the power of doing what's right. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.